Welcome to the Pop Cult Podcast. Here are your hosts Ariana and Seth.
I'm Seth.
I'm Ariana.
And this is the Pop Cult Podcast. Today we're going to be talking about two recent releases that center around authoritarian rule and rebellion. A little later we'll be talking about the Brazilian film I'm Still Here. But first up, sadly, we'll be talking about the Netflix release of The Electric State. An orphaned teenager, Michelle, teams up with a mysterious robot and a smuggler to find her missing brother in a retro-futuristic alternate 1990s where human and robots coexist, but tensions are high. So, Ariana, I have a little familiarity with The Electric State.
Yeah.
It's based on an art book, I guess is what you would call it, by Swedish painter and writer Simon Stålberg, who is also responsible for a similar book called Tales from the Loop that was adapted into an Amazon series. And he likes to play around with the mundane and then put these sort of fantastic, often gigantic things in the landscape, in the paintings.
Yeah.
And so in the instance of The Electric State, it is a world where there was a war between humanity and robots that were developed in the 1950s following World War II that are much more advanced than anything we have in our world.
Yeah.
And there was also a tabletop RPG made based off of this. I think there have been a few other of his books that have gotten that kind of treatment. And I played the Electric State RPG. It has a really great solo mode, and it had some mechanics I'd never seen that I think are like really good. So I wasn't sure if I wanted to watch this movie or not, but it has been received with such negativity that I thought, let's talk about it.
Let's add to that pile.
When I usually don't talk about movies that I hate, but I think this movie poses some interesting questions about Netflix, about the state of American movies. So let's talk about the visuals of the movie, because I think if the movie has any strengths, it's the way it looks.
And even then, it's not that stunning.
So what do you think of the retro-futuristic 90s?
I don't think they even fully took advantage of it. Because I'm looking at Millie Bobby Brown with her bleach blonde hair, and I don't know if I'm supposed to get Pamela Anderson look from this teenager.
Well, she has that sort of like crimp
Yeah,
kind of thing going on.
but even then, it's not good.
But let's talk about I would say the robots look good for the most part. But I don't know if that's enough to carry a movie for me anymore, the special effects.
Well, I think it's also this cliche of sorts. Because there's a robot war, it's all these robots that are still functioning and doing the same things, but with this idea that they are free from the shackles of humankind, forcing them to do this work that humans didn't want to do to begin with. And I had mentioned to you, and I forgot the title again, but you remembered it was a book that I read where robots and humans.
The Wild Built.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's supposed to be, after a while, humans had to rely less on technology, and any of the robots left basically considered that they had reincarnation lives because they would rebuild themselves from fallen parts.
So you found that a more interesting play on that idea, on this idea.
Versus this was,
well, this is
Mr. Peanuts has a mechanical, and he was the head of the robots.
I think the thing about this movie is everything else, like the original book, the tabletop RPG, does not have this tone. The tone of well, you don't know. Why are you saying no? You don't know.
I've seen Tales from the
Well, no, I'm talking about the book, The Electric State. But I mean, yeah, Tales from the Loop is much closer to the tone of the books.
Yeah.
Where it's this kind of chill vibe, and it's just sort of exploring this interesting world and the contradictions in it and the surprises that emerge from it. This film, we're kind of getting off track. I want to focus on the visuals. I think It is a very Spielbergian movie. Like it's trying
Yeah.
really hard to be Spielberg. I think of the scene where she escapes the foster home that she's in,
Yeah.
and just the way that's shot, especially when she gets in the car and like peels out of the neighborhood, felt like something you'd see in a Spielberg movie.
Yeah.
The music as well, the score feels very much like a Spielberg movie, but the entire time you have all these very big visuals happening. Even so, when we get to the final battle, it actually feels very small in scale.
I think a lot of the times what happens is a lot of the visuals for the robot
Hmm.
are stuck in the 1950s and 60s.
Yeah, and you'd think like it's been 40 years since these robots were first rolled out. Why do we not see some more modern design?
Especially like,
Or I mean, I guess we see the
or even the 80s take of it.
well,
There's,
but think about the Kihei Kwan. I can never pronounce his name correctly. That character, he has that sort of PC
which
robot
is the
that
only
looks
one
more
that,
80s, yeah.
yeah, that's the
But
only
Mr.
one.
Peanut looks like something from the 50s. The Cosmo, the sort of main robot that Michelle is with, looks like something from the 50s. And so, yeah, it's just all very confusing about what the tone they were going for was.
Yeah.
Because I kept feeling like the music and the visuals were not always in sync with the tone of the scene, like what it should be.
No, and it also was like this weird thing of like, Chris Pratt's in here.
Well,
Let's
hey,
put some
you're jumping
80s
ahead. You're jumping
rock.
ahead. You're jumping ahead.
Because I want to get it over with.
Uh, I have this broken down. We're gonna go through it. So we'll talk about the performances. Headlining the film is Millie Bobby Brown, and I was thinking, I don't think I've ever seen her in anything other than Stranger Things, and then Godzilla versus Kong, where she was briefly reprising a role she did in a previous Godzilla movie. What are your feelings on Millie Bobby Brown as an actress?
She's just a pretty face delivering lines in an American accent.
Yeah, I find her boring to watch.
Yeah.
She's never compelling. The emotions are never feel resonant. I feel like when she was a little kid, her acting was more emotionally powerful than it is now.
Yeah.
You think about that very first season of Stranger
Yeah,
Things.
and then you compare it to the last season, which will be the last season we've ever watched, which was supposed to be based on the bullying that she faced after becoming an actress.
But I do not think that her performance in this film is entirely her fault, and I think we can know that because of some other actors in the movie. Woody Norman, who plays her brother Christopher, who we'd seen in Mike Mills' Come On, Come On, was very good in that movie as a kid
Yeah,
actor. Giancarlo Esposito is in this movie, and he is a very good actor.
yeah.
And you would not know that. If this is the first time you'd ever seen him in a film, you'd think he's one of the worst actors you've ever seen.
You just thought that, oh man, that old man finally got a big role, and that's it.
Well,
That's all he's ever gonna be in.
he's so stiff in this role.
Because most of his lines are delivered through his face projected off a robot, so of
Well,
course.
yeah, and that's another thing where you can tell that this was a case of they didn't have all the actors on set at the same time. I just saw somebody point out that they don't think that Millie Bobby Brown and Chris Pratt were actually together for much of the filming because people apparently have gone back and looked and said there's a lot of scenes where you see his face, but it's a reverse shot of her, and it's clearly a person in a wig.
Oof.
And so it was a film that was like composited together. And then you think about some of the other characters, like Stanley Tucci never appears on screen with any of these other characters,
No,
right?
he appears with like
He appears through a drone camera.
yeah, or like the interview that he has with like what was that actress that we're just like, why is she in this? Was it Helen Hunt or
Oh, Holly, yeah,
Holly?
Holly Hunter.
Which is like
What the
she did like
fuck?
the perfect TV announcer voice, but it was just weird because she
It
was
was
only
weird. She's
in
so
for that.
wasted. And I'm like, Holly Hunter's a good
I feel like
actress.
they don't know what to do with her anytime she's cast in anything.
Well, anymore, it seems like they don't. Uh, yeah, that was baffling to me to throw her in there. And like Stanley Tucci, who I don't think is like one of the greatest actors ever, but he's still good, is a dead weight in this movie.
He just felt like he was playing evil Jeff Bezos.
Well, he felt like he was playing the same character he played in like a Transformers movie.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, it's a movie where the performances are so telegraphed and so phoned in
Yeah,
that
and
it just
like
everyone feels so bored and just wanting to get this over
I think
with.
like Anthony Mackie being the voice of like Chris Pratt's
Herman.
character, like Herman. I couldn't tell the difference of his voice, one to begin with,
Once I saw it was Anthony Mackie, I kind of
but
hear
then
it.
it's also sort of like it's like, for example, if I think about like Robert Pattinson and
The Boy and the
the
Heron.
Boy with the Heron, I can't
Yeah.
tell that it's him, but I can tell he's really acting. And in this one, it's just like, oh yeah, 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 I get it. Black sidekick voice, but
Well,
put a robot filter
you bring up
over
something interesting, the robot
it.
voices. Woody Harrelson as Mr. Peanut, Jenny Slate as Penny Pal. It sounds like them. They're not doing voices.
Yeah,
So there's no character really. Even Ke Huy Quan, the robot that's supposed to be kind of modeled after him, just sounds like him.
yeah.
There's no variation there. And so as a result, it just you can feel the sort of hollowness of all the performances in every scene. But when you match it with these visuals that are trying to be very like colorful and bold, there's so much dissonance between these two things where you're like, but this is not that exciting of a movie. It's not
No.
earning it. Um, the Chris Pratt
Oof.
as Keats,
Ugh.
who is introduced in file footage. There's like a montage at the beginning of the movie that kind of takes you through the history of what's going on, and that was also confusing because the film opens with Michelle waiting for her brother Christopher to finish this entrance exam at a university.
Yeah.
And the parents are back there, and they don't have a single line of dialogue, from what I can recall.
No, they appeared. I thought they were ghosts. I thought for a second, like she was like thinking, oh, the parents are there, and then they're suddenly like left to talk to themselves when he's done with the exam. Like what the parents went off for a fucking walk, and we're like, yeah, no,
Yeah.
don't worry, she'll take care of him.
And then, so you introduce this where it's like, oh, Christopher is a genius. That's the idea you're supposed to
Yeah,
be introduced to. And then it goes through this montage of news footage, file footage from the robot war, and you see Chris Pratt as a soldier that gets interviewed. I didn't know why that needed to be in the movie because you essentially get reintroduced to him later anyway.
who ends up saying he's in the army and
Yeah.
fought.
So like why do you need to put that scene in there when he's going to be brought into the film as if we don't know who he is in the first place? That feels
Yeah,
like some awful reshoot decision. Uh but Chris Pratt as an actor. I don't enjoy Chris Pratt. And I don't think I've ever enjoyed Chris Pratt. I was introduced to him through Parks and Rec, which is a show I just don't enjoy.
yeah,
I've seen two of the three Guardians of the Galaxy movies. They were fine. Uh, I think because I think there was a few years ago where they were talking about him potentially replacing Harrison Ford as Indiana Jones. It was after
yeah.
Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, and they really weren't sure what to do. And that was before Harrison Ford agreed to do The Force Awakens. And part of that agreement was they make another Indiana Jones movie. Uh, but Chris Pratt has, it's like the illusion of charisma.
Yeah,
You put him up against someone like a Chris Hemsworth, who we think of Chris Hemsworth outside of Marvel, Furiosa, for example. There's a charisma there. There's someone who's actually crafting a character and a performance. And then you come to Chris Pratt, and it's just the same thing in every movie.
yeah.
I don't even go all the way going back to like Parks and Rec. It's really the same character. And so I've never seen him actually act.
I think the only time I've seen him act, and it was like he's still kind of being an asshole, was like on Moneyball, but he was a side character. He was not the main guy.
I forgot he was in that. Yeah, it was great.
And I do love critics that afterwards his like sort of like downfall from being this leading man, even though he's being shoved into our faces no matter what, is he did the mortal sin, which people found out later was he decided to become the fat guy to make himself like appealing to do comedy, only to be like, oh, I've always been a fit guy all this time.
Well, he has very Zachary Levi vibes of
Yeah.
like, this guy is like a shark.
Yes.
I don't trust him and I don't like him. Which is not a good way to have the co-lead of your movie. So yeah, the two of them, do you feel there's any chemistry between those
No,
characters?
I would have been more interested in having Anthony Mackie play like Chris Pratt's character.
Yeah, because he actually, like, even as the robot, there's at least an attempt at a performance.
Yes. And I feel like it would have been way more interesting versus, oh, Chris Pratt plays the same kind of a lovable guy that doesn't really want to help save the world, but he's just gonna do it anyways because the kid really needs him.
So when we look at the people responsible for this, that would be the Russo brothers, who I think we first encountered them through the off season of Community,
Yeah, yeah,
where
yeah.
Dan Harmon wasn't there. They went on to become very successful through a bunch of Avengers movies.
Yep.
Um, and this feels like they've just kind of given up. Because this feels like a Marvel movie in
It
terms of the
felt like
tone.
Netflix version of a Marvel film. It's as if, oh well, Zack Snyder stuff isn't hitting the way we want it to hit. Like all these, like, oh, this is not hitting the way we wanted it. Electra State, that will be it, and we're gonna put Netflix's baby star,
Millie
Millie Bobby
Bobby, Millie
Brown.
Bobby. But yeah, they spent $320 million on this movie. It, I guess that's CG.
Yeah,
When
and like
there's a lot of like name people, like I mean Woody Harrelson, but he doesn't appear on screen. It's voice acting, and I'm pretty sure that like voice acting is not paid as highly as, when your face is on screen. Um, and so there's a lot of people we don't see their faces, we hear their voices. Is Chris Pratt in that bracket of movie star at this point that he's going to be bringing in that kind of money?
I don't know. It's just none of this is surprising. It felt as if like this would have been a film that Netflix would have released during the summer in the theaters,
Yeah,
right?
like the whole concept
But
feels
then
like a summer movie.
but then it did there wasn't enough confidence in it, so it was like it stayed a Netflix film, still considered a hit because of how many
Considered a hit?
yeah, because it
Uh,
still got views.
it's not though. It's not.
Review wise, no, but it's like
We actually are going to talk about that. How did you feel about the pacing of the film? We talked a bit about the choppiness of the opening of the movie. Once we kind of get into the story, how did you feel about the way Michelle's journey was laid out and the stakes?
it just was like a straight line.
Yeah, there really isn't.
There's like
And there's no
no
real interesting divergence from where like any other movie.
yeah, because like there's supposed to be like this whole thing that people are connected to like the web, using these masks and passing out and just being like almost like drugged up.
What's the neuro casters? Yeah.
But they explain it so poorly. So when the neurocasters are supposed to be used in her classroom, she's like, no, 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 I don't use that. I am
Have a
hooked
medical
up.
condition.
She's like, I have a medical condition. I'm hooked on what we call reality. And like she's above it all.
And the film really doesn't do much with the
They
neurocasters.
don't even explain it very well too.
There's like I think maybe twice we go inside like the virtual world.
But even then, it's all through like Stanley Tucci's like evil character.
Doesn't she go in at one time to talk to like her brother
But like
at the end? But yeah, you're talking about the glimpses we get of people in the outside world, like when they're at a gas station and there's someone who's just like collapsed on the ground up against a wall with a neurocaster on.
yeah,
And those are visuals that come from the book because there's this whole thing where there's theories about people's consciousnesses being transferred out of their bodies into the virtual space or vice versa. AI entities coming into the material world and possessing like, and that's where like the drones really show up in the book, is that like there's this giant bipedal drone in one of the things, and he has all these cables that come out of him as tethers, and they're connected to people who have the neurocasters on, who are just these marching zombies that it has control over,
yeah.
and it sort of wanders the countryside, and so there's the book has all these really evocative ideas and visuals, and then it just feels like it was completely steamrolled into the most generic, boring, like Marvel-esque kind of
Yeah, and
movie.
they did this thing where they assumed that we understood the world that they presented us with by doing these fast clips and then to be like, well, people are addicted to it now. Like, like how people are addicted to their phones.
But they barely touch on that.
But it's like you have to explain it because I live in a world where they've tried to do virtual reality multiple times and it ain't hitting. Like people aren't on their fucking like they're like what happened with the like iPhone glasses or the mask. I don't know anyone who uses them.
Yeah. Uh, so the film has a 14% on Rotten Tomatoes, and a lot of the criticisms of the film, I think, line up with what we have said, which is such a lack of originality and emotional depth.
Yeah.
And this movie has all of these scenes where I understand that I'm supposed to be feeling myself getting teary-eyed and being emotionally moved by the relationship between this girl and her brother. But like you think about those scenes between them on the couch, like around Christmas, and the dialogue, it's both like super exposition heavy because they have to explain all these things to the audience. And then there's no like connection between these two
No, like
actors.
there's name me three things Michelle is either passionate about or good at.
She loves her brother.
Okay.
She won't use a neurocaster. I think that's about it.
There's like
Like I don't know anything about like who this person is, or because she's this orphan now who's in foster care, where what does she feel her life is going to be like? Like what is she trying to do before,
especially
this robot shows
you're
up and kind of
telling me
interrupts
that
things.
she has escaped from multiple foster homes and the new one that she's in, but we don't see anything that shows that she's good at escaping. In fact, when she breaks into like her foster parents' car, she starts to go, "Do you know how to drive? I don't know how to drive," and screams.
Yeah, it's bad. Um the Vulture in their review labeled it a $320 million piece of junk. The Guardian focused more on Netflix struggles with high budget blockbusters, which I think is the key thing here. Because we didn't watch it, but they tried something similar with Zack Snyder's Rebel Moon, which
Yeah,
you kind
that's
of
what
hinted
I
at. Yeah.
mentioned.
And just from the trailers from that, I could see like, oh, this is too reliant on just so much CG to the point that no one looks like they're standing in a real place.
Yeah, the
Everyone looks
thing
like they're
is,
standing in
like,
a green
here's
screen.
the thing. I have no problem if you're gonna straight up rip off Star Wars or do whatever fucking like thing that you
Or
take the art
Spielberg in this
or
case.
Spielberg or lift an idea off of another artist. But your job afterwards is to make it emotionally compelling.
Yeah, if I don't
If
care about the characters, why would I
like
like the
you can
movie?
make it visually great, but your main job as directors and actors is to make it emotionally compelling for me to go, I'm buying it. I want the second one. I want the comic books. Do something. And I got nothing.
And I can't imagine anyone watch this movie and then feel compelled to like pick up the book or the tabletop game because it's so unappealing.
Like again, I like, ooh, her brother's really smart. Okay, what was he majoring in? It was, buddy, you're gonna change the world because you're so smart. Okay, does he want to go into sciences? Does he want to go in technology? Was he sort of
Yeah, like
like,
how is he going to change the
or was
world?
he kind of like, maybe he was like very pro robot at
But
the end of the day and was like, I want to work a way for like us to have robots work, but also like not have them
like respect their
like
autonomy.
respect their autonomy, anything. But it was like, you're a genius, and by the way, we think you have autism.
Yeah, there was some like the scene with the action figure on the lake beach. It was weird. Um, But yeah, I also think it's caught up in this stupid popular view of intelligence in America. When you see someone like Elon Musk, there's never really an explanation as to, okay, how are they smart? Like, what are they good at doing? It's just they're just smart, and because they're smart, they're going to do big things. When history has shown us there are plenty of smart people that have fallen by the wayside and like failed to live up to any potential they had, like constantly.
Yeah, it's also like the difficulties of like you're saying that this is a child prodigy that you're putting him on a pedestal that he could have easily fallen over.
Well, it's just I never really understood what he was good at. We see him doing
No.
like a like complicated math at the beginning, but that's it.
Yeah.
And it's just like, oh, is he really good at math, or like how is he intelligent?
Yeah.
And it's never really explained. Um, it I did think of another movie, and this one is a Spielberg movie, and it's a movie I didn't really like, but it is better than this movie,
Okay.
and that's Ready Player One. It's a movie you did not. I spared you from having to watch it. I watched it. It was bad, but at least that movie also has the virtual reality aspect to it, and this sort of dystopian future. And there is a lot of nostalgia in it, and the way this is supposed to kind of do that with the 90s.
Yeah.
But I think with Ready Player One, I actually understood the relationship between this virtual world and the technology and the human world. While I didn't think it was a very good movie, I found the pacing and the chemistry between the actors to be much more interesting than this. And it even has like an evil business guy in it, played by Ben Mendelsohn.
Yeah.
Uh, but yeah, and it's weird. I never thought I'd recommend to anyone, but I'm like, instead of watching The Electric State, you should probably just watch Ready Player One, because if you want something like that,
Well, I'm
it's
sure
the better
because of
movie.
the promotional devices that are given to you in Ready Player One makes sense because it's probably connected to the book. This one, I did not need the bunch of like Mr. Peanut, Dr. Pepper, all this fucking shit that
Well, there's
was
a lot of
just
product placement.
like it was like, okay, I got it, Netflix. You needed to go out of your hand because you're gonna pay this by yourself, and there's the product placement there.
So we mentioned the Russo brothers. How do you think this compares to something like Infinity War and Endgame? Even though those aren't movies we
This
necessarily
is
love.
less charming.
Yeah.
Because at the least the other ones they had actors that understood the quippiness. It's this weird thing that even though Chris Pratt has delivered quippiness before, it didn't land well because it's like,
I think it's because they're not all in the same space filming at the same time.
yeah,
And so they can't play off of each other. And that's a big part of getting comedy right, is you have to play off of each other. I also think the movie has far too many moments where it's trying to be emotional and then immediately undercuts it. And this is like a Marvel movie thing, by having a character essentially say the equivalent of like, well, that just happened. And it happens over and over and over. And I just feels like these movies are embarrassed of themselves because they can't ever allow themselves to be serious.
yeah.
They constantly have to like undercut that. And I still am trying to figure out why, because it makes these movies far less enjoyable. Um, the I don't really think this adds anything to the sci-fi genre in any way. I think it's
No,
disposable garbage,
it is.
which is kind of what Netflix makes now. And it's weird because I think before Netflix started trying to make all its own original shit and it just was like a place you could stream things, that was the best Netflix. And once they started doing all these Netflix originals, they just feel so cheap and crappy.
Yeah.
It just feels like a machine built to just churn out garbage to I don't know why. The only good thing I think on Netflix at this point is I think you should leave.
Yeah, I think it's also this weird thing is like with series, for example, with series, you're just supposed to like take them, fix them along the way, make them better. But Netflix has this awful thing that they'll just pick up something for two seasons. If it's not popular enough, nix it, throw
The
it
OA.
away. Yeah. And it just doesn't make for new, interesting items. And then now they're plugging all their money into these big budgets that just,
Well, it's like it's big budget movies or then the most lazy like teen rom-com, like YA rom-com
it's also
stuff.
like this weird thing. It's not as if like these big budgets are doing anything interesting. We're not seeing like any new people. You're getting the same old fucking
Well, it feels
people.
like the studio system where they had this sort of pool of actors that they would just keep putting in stuff.
Well,
I
I
know,
think
like, I
like
think Wednesday has been a success for Netflix.
well, I think it also I mean like director wise. Like, okay, to me, I think it's sort of interesting to have like Tim Burton in a project, a new part, like doing a series because he hadn't done a movies in a long time.
And he had never done a show. I mean, like an ongoing show. He'd
Yeah,
done, I think it was like an episode of the
which
Shelley
allowed him to
Duvall
then go
thing.
do Beetlejuice.
Yeah.
But we think about the fact that like, oh, Zack Snyder, who fucking had his goddamn like Superman and Batman shit, who then
Who was,
got the
yeah.
Snyder release out. And then was like with the Rebel Moon, like people were joking that they want the Snyder cut of it just
Well,
because
the thing is, I have not seen people talking about Rebel Moon. Not even like in a negative light, which I think is even worse. Because at least if people are talking about it negatively, they're talking about it. The fact that like the Rebel Moon, because it was like 3 parts or something,
yeah.
and they're all like 2.5 hours long, they've come out and just hit with a thud. Now, I'm sure if I looked around online, I'd find fan communities, but it's certainly nowhere like a Stranger Things.
But again, you're going for people who have already had these major big blockbusters successes, but they're just being like, just go replicate it. Oh, find some small fucking directors with no ideas. Let them do something weird.
And I think that's something, do we have that in the streaming world?
I
Is
don't
a
think
platform that is finding new talent and like really having breakout movies? Because you think about
I
Hulu, you think Netflix, you think
like
Peacock, not really.
even Adult Swim has died to a certain degree because they would it would be short stuff.
Yeah.
And you'd find really weird stuff that was like interesting.
But it's like it's the Rick and Mortification, which in turn that's Dan Harmon, right? And when the Russo brothers came from a Dan Harmon show.
Yeah.
So is the root of all our problems Dan Harmon? Is that man responsible for this?
I'm allowed to fucking blame him for this one.
So would you recommend The Electric Slave?
No!
Yeah, it's 2 hours and 8 minutes long, and that's far too long. I think a 90-minute movie would have been perfectly fine. But yeah, I would not recommend this movie to our audience at all. Eunice Paiva begins a lonely battle to learn the truth behind the disappearance of her husband, former Brazilian Congressman Rubens Paiva, while trying to keep her family together. This is, I believe it was nominated, yeah, it was nominated for the Academy Award for Best Picture and also Best Foreign Language Film. I'm Still Here, and based on the true story of Eunice Paiva, whose husband was taken by the Brazilian military dictatorship that was in power in Brazil from 1964 to 1985. And the 70s, which is when this film takes place, was sort of their peak. So it's a film that feels weirdly relevant.
Yeah.
Before we started recording, we watched, it was a video that the United States government had put out that to me is a signal that the Fourth Reich has arisen, right? Like it felt very obvious. Uh, a Hundreds of Venezuelan people living in the United States were forcibly deported under the claims that they were members of gangs, and the proof of this were tattoos that they had. They were sent not to Venezuela, but to El Salvador, which sounds like a hellscape to me from things I've read about it. They have a very crypto bro president.
Yeah.
They brag that their prisons are self-sufficient, which means that they are slave camps, essentially. And this video we watched, it was very, they were reveling in it. It was Nazi propaganda.
Yeah.
It was straight up Nazi propaganda. But this film also deals with disappearing people from a sort of strong arm regime. What did you think of I'm Still Here, Ariana?
I Am Still Here is beautifully shot and thoughtfully scripted and also just well acted out. there wasn't, it doesn't feel melodramatic. It doesn't feel as if it's stretching itself out to the point that you feel as if like Eugenia is not a real person. In fact, you start,
Who?
how do you say?
Eunice?
Eunice
How would you say it in Spanish?
Eugenia.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. And is
Eunice,
that how they say her name in the movie?
I can't remember right now. They say like she has but she is. I do like the fact that at the beginning of the film, it's not as if she is going along with what's going on, but she's kind of like, I'm sticking to what I know.
Well, she's a housewife.
Yes.
They have 5 children, so they're very busy. We learn later that he was a congressman, and then he uh, was, when the coup happened in '64, he was exiled from the country. And so I guess we have to assume that the whole family was,
Yeah.
and that they've since returned as restrictions have softened. But as we see in the opening of the movie, there are military roadblocks. There are revolutionary groups that are taking action in the community, and it's a weird. It feels like a very weird convergence of different elements because this is a very upper middle class family,
Yes.
and in America, the upper middle class are not feeling the brunt of Trump in the way that immigrants are, in the way that trans people are, in the way that poor people and homeless people are.
Yeah.
Uh, and so it is a kind of scary reminder that there is a lot more for there's a lot more room for America to fall
Yes.
because there's a lot of people that aren't being directly touched by the horror yet, and
And
that there could be circumstances under which they are.
I think it's also that America is going to be very careful about who it is that they target. So I think it's going to be within rare form, or it's already clamped down too fucking late if, say, a former senator disappeared. And I'm gonna like throw out like if a young Bernie Sanders was taken out, that would be surprising because I don't think in the States they're that willing to do it.
Well, I feel like the Senate is in the pocket of corporations, and
Exactly.
the House of Representatives is just a ball of chaos. So
Yeah.
they're not much of a threat at all.
Yeah, and in this one it's supposed to be so this family has their own group of people that they normally hang out with, that they're okay with.
And they're
Uh,
very like all college
college
educated.
educated people, all people who are doing well. So either they work at a bank or
They own a
they
bookstore.
own a bookstore and a publishing house, or they're a lawyer. They're all financially doing well. But it comes to Eunice later on to find out that her husband hasn't been working with the armed forces, but has been relaying information back to those who have been captured to their families. So they find out where they are, they send an anonymous letter, they make sure that whoever that like gave up the information is safe. That's all they've been doing.
Because the Brazilian regime is very intent on making sure that once someone disappears, you never hear from them again or know what happens.
Exactly.
Uh, so we were talking about the opening of the movie, and I think it's a really good opening. The music, the cinematography, it introduces us to all these characters fairly quickly, and we get an understanding of who they are in just a matter of like a few lines.
Yeah,
It's the opposite of the Electric State, where
exactly.
I understood all these characters and there was connection between them. Fernanda Torres, who plays you, but there's a lot of really good chemistry between Fernanda Torres and Selton Mayo, who plays her husband.
Yes.
Like I believed them as a married couple.
Yeah.
I believe that she would do anything necessary to like find out what happened to him. It was just such a very believable relationship. And then they both have such great chemistry with the child actors.
Oh yeah, they were good. I like the reason why they end up like so good friends of them who own a publishing house and a bookstore have decided that they're going to move to London.
Well, it's because there's so much censorship going on.
Yes, and they have invited the family to go with them, which Eunice at first thinks it's kind of funny. She's just sort of like, why would they invite us? And the husband explains it by being like, our friend is paranoid. He always thinks that everybody's watching them.
When their oldest daughter goes with them to kind of
Yes.
like see what it's like there.
Yeah, and the reason that they sent her off was she'll start in college soon. As she starts college, she's going to get in politics. And it says it's so tense right now, we just need her to get out of here right now so she can make rational decisions before she starts school. And it's, it's that common thought, but it's also like this thing of it being like kind of nudging and saying, hey, we know things are bad, but we can't really have you thinking about it, okay?
Well, it's yeah, they're because they're upper middle class, they're trying to keep their minds off of it because like a lot of upper middle class liberal people, they think, "Oh, we're safe from this."
But it's also this interesting thing that the husband is on the side doing this thing, the
Yeah.
wife not knowing, and being like, yeah, let's send her away.
But yeah, Fernanda Torres's performance is so strong. Um, she uh I think she won the Golden Globe for Best Actress in a Drama.
As she should have.
She the scene where the men show up on Christmas to abduct her husband,
Yeah.
and she is put in this place of having to navigate a very tense, dangerous situation
Yes.
because she has kids that are like out on the beach and she has kids that are at home. And when these men come in, and that's one very interesting thing that I liked was after they're visited by these thugs, their house remains dark for like the rest of the movie until they move.
Yeah.
And it's these men they close all the curtains, and suddenly everyone's kind of in shadows. And she's trying to be this pillar, trying to make sure her children don't understand really what's happening because it's too much for them. She doesn't want them to freak out.
Yeah.
But and so she's being very overly courteous to these men, like to the point where I was getting frustrated with her, where it's just like, fucking kick them out. But it's this her understanding they'll just fucking kill me and my family, like
Or they'll hurt my husband even further
yeah.
if I do this.
And so yeah, she's just so good in this role.
Yeah.
Um, what did you think of the directorial choices? And when I'm talking about that, I'm talking about the cinematography. I know there's a lot of handheld camera. There was a lot of incorporation of Super 8 footage that was supposed to be like family home movies.
Yeah.
Uh, and then a lot of music of the period that's Brazilian specifically.
I thought it was really well done. It really puts you into the situation. It also puts you into this feeling that this was a family and a group of friends that really did love and value each other. I thought it was interesting was there's never like, it was so and so that betrayed us. It was worse because it was unknown. They didn't know where the information leaked from.
Well, and the idea is that someone probably was tortured into saying something. They
Yeah.
didn't give it up because they were going to be safe. They gave it
Yeah.
up because they didn't want to be tortured.
And there's also just all the different layers that go in afterwards for her to maintain her family and why things become a secret. There is like that tense moment between her and her daughter, like Elena, who or
Which one was that?
I think
Is that the
she's
one that is kidnapped with her?
yes.
Yeah.
Where she is wanting information, but her like the mom is tensing up even more and more, and she's begging her daughter like, do not ask me more. We are not talking about this. And you understand where her daughter's coming from is even though she only suffered one day of torture, she still had to deal with the following days where their mother was not there. And knowing that she was in a place that she was, that she could maybe explain to the younger kids like how horrifyingly like scary that was.
When I think when they take Eunice and Elena, they do a very good job of making that sequence very immersive,
Yeah.
where know as much as they do. So you're like them trying to figure out what are these people going to do to me? where am I specifically? When am I going to get out of here?
Yeah.
And my read of that was that the government forces didn't think that these women had any information, but what they were trying to do was intimidate them into silence
Yeah.
because eventually they're going to catch on that Rubens is dead. And they want Eunice and her family so scared to say anything that they'll get away with it.
Well, yeah, it's suddenly like they've been looking the same a bit like the same photographs, it seems like over and over again, but only to find out Eunice's photo is in there and
Or you're talking about
Elena,
mugshots
like
that they show her,
mugshots.
yeah.
And they're looking at their own mugshots, being like, when was that put in?
Mm.
I don't remember that. But they're like snapped awake, also like giving like flashes of light on them when it's been completely dark. So they get them so disoriented that's almost like saying, well, your photo's in there. And if it isn't you, someone else could mistake you.
Or someone we'll show later will point at you in this book, and now you'll be back here for good.
Yeah.
How do you feel about the way Eunice handles after she's released? And I think she's in there for what, 3 weeks? Like seems like a long time.
I think it makes complete sense when you watch the movie in its entirety. At first, you start wondering, like, for example, she reads out a letter that Vera, her oldest daughter, sent to the family.
Mhm.
But this is a moment that she skips through stuff that Vera has questions about because she's reading the newspapers. She's saying that she can see everything, like read what's going on, but no one is telling her what is happening.
Yeah, because that was one thing I was kind of surprised at was this Rubens Paiva, his disappearance was like international news.
Yeah, and so that is when Elena has an argument with her mom. She's like, "Why aren't we talking about this?" Only for you to discover once Eunice has a conversation with one of her husband's friends why it is they just can't go into it. Like he's like, if you declare your husband dead without any evidence, then we can't further investigate.
Yeah, so you have to keep the case open.
And so, but it's this thing that this is the thing that pushes her to then do something, a huge change of her life from being someone who goes, I'm just gonna go with the flow of things to I'm gonna make a change, and while I'm making that change, I'm still gonna smile.
Well, I think it's also interesting that uh, Eunice has three homes over the course of the movie.
Yeah.
There's the home that she lives in when we find her. There's the new home on this piece of land overlooked by the Christ the Redeemer statue that Rubens is like, because he's an architect, has designed and they're going to build. And then there's the apartment that she ends up in the 90s. And I think that's very interesting because it looks as though things are going to get even better because this house that her husband has designed is just this like gorgeous house in a
Yeah.
gorgeous place, and then that's just taken from her. And what she ends up in is a perfectly nice apartment, but in a much more, it's not as nice as that house they had in San Paulo.
Yeah.
Uh, but there is so much sacrifice that that character makes over the course of the film for her family.
Yeah.
Uh, the and I think what's interesting is, as an American, were you ever taught anything about the military dictatorship that ruled over Brazil in school?
No.
And it seems like an important piece of, 20th century history to know, because it was in power for like 2 decades, over 2 decades.
Yeah.
Um, and because of that, like Brazil is still feeling the impact. Lula da Silva, who's the current president of Brazil, was active as as a revolutionary during this period and was imprisoned and survived. But then you have, and I love the fact that I've forgotten his name, the last president of Brazil, who I
Yeah.
can't even remember his name, who's just a fascist thug. Um, how like that guy was sort of born out of
Yeah.
this authoritarian, uh, fascistic, eugenicist view of the world because uh, when you think about like how Eunice in the film eventually becomes involved in the indigenous movement in the Amazon rainforest. There's some talk about that near the end of the film. And that's something where these people who come to power in Brazil, one of the first groups they target apparently are tribal people that live in the Amazon rainforest.
Yeah.
And because they see them as, well, they're outside of our society, they're much more defenseless than people that like live in our cities, and they're in our way of just like raping the land essentially and profiting off of it. Um, there was one performance in this movie that I did not see coming, and we don't have it a lot, and it's only the very end of the movie, but god damn,
It's
it
good.
like punches you in the gut. And that is Fernanda Montenegro as the older Eunice. And one of the things when I saw her, it's in the very kind of the epilogue of the movie. She's playing a very elderly version of Eunice with Alzheimer's. And I was like, oh, wow, that casting was great. That woman looks almost exactly like Fernanda Torres. And I said, I wonder if Fernanda Torres got married and changed her last name. And I looked it up, and yup, that's her mom. And I also found out that Fernanda Montenegro, who uh, she was in the movie Central Station, which I think was directed by this same director,
Yeah.
and is considered like one of the greatest Brazilian movies ever made. I've never seen it. But she's considered by many to be the greatest Brazilian actress that there's ever been. So it's the equivalent of like Meryl Streep and her daughter playing different versions of the same
Yeah.
character, right? And then Meryl Streep only shows up for like the last 10 minutes, 12 minutes of the movie.
Steals the
And just
movie.
like, yeah, because and she doesn't have like a line of dialogue.
No, it is all like
It's the face. And I constantly come back to this, is the best acting can be done without a single word of dialogue. If you can convey a character and emotions without ever opening your mouth, then that you are an incredible actor. And I think Montenegro proves that in here. You don't even pay attention to anyone else in the scene. She's so like magnetic and strong, and then provides this beautiful like, you know, everything gets kind of tied up at the end.
Yeah.
But I do like that it's not in a way that feels overly sentimental.
No.
It's honest to what happened, uh, and it's sad, but it's very good. I also this film was apparently based on uh, a book that her son, or Eunice's son, wrote, Marcello Paiva, who is an author. And so one of the interesting details that's in the movie, because I had to look it up as we were watching it, was when we jump from the 70s to 1996.
Yeah.
And the next time we see Marcello, who's now, in his 30s, he's in a wheelchair.
Yeah.
And there's a brief scene where they go, it's like to a public records building because they're wanting to it's the death certificate for Rubens. Uh, and so the woman behind the counter hands him a paperback, and it's clearly implied that this is a book he's written.
Yeah.
And she'd like his autograph, which he gives her. But you also notice his hands, like he doesn't use his fingers. He's like curled into a fist.
Yeah.
And so I immediately had to look that up and go, what is that about? And so Marcello Paiva, when he was 20, had an accident where he was like cliff diving and fell on his back. And they said he became a tetraplegic, which I'm not exactly sure. I know there's paraplegic, quadriplegic. I'm not sure what tetraplegic is. But he did not have the use of his arms, and I think at all. And so they did therapy with that. And so then when he finally got the use of his arms, he wrote a memoir about his recovery from that. And that's the book that we see. And then later he would write this book, which was a memoir about his father's disappearance and how his mother handled it and like what was going on with the family. And so that was just one of those interesting things where I love that they put that detail in there, but they didn't feel compelled to have to explain because at the end of the day, this is a Brazilian movie.
Yeah.
And so if you're the Brazilian audience, you know because you know this guy, you know this story. And so
And if you're American, you're just thinking diversity casting. Just kidding.
No. If you're American, then it's a great opportunity for you to, use your phone for something productive for once and look it up and find out, why is this guy in the wheelchair? What's going on? Well, I haven't seen that many Brazilian movies.
Okay.
I was thinking about it. I really haven't. I think like City of God,
Yeah.
which is probably like the most well-known Brazilian movie I've seen. This movie really seems to be gaining a lot of traction. Uh, it apparently has been sparking conversations in Brazil about parts of the history that people have just kind of glossed over, have tried to move past. Uh, and so I'm very interested to see like what the long-term impact of it is. I'm also very interested to find more of Fernanda Torres and her mother's movies
Yeah.
because they're just, especially the mother. I was like, I got to see this. What would you do? if She's in an entire movie. Like this one scene, she's so good. Would you recommend I'm Still Here to our audience?
Yes.
I think it does a much better job of making you emotionally connect with the characters that are being under this sort of authoritarian rule compared to the electric state. It is so emotionally resonant. And I also think it serves as a really good reminder that the United States is quite a privileged country
Yeah.
in that because of its kind of geographical distance from the rest of the world, it's been spared a lot of experiences that most countries have. And in often cases, the U.S. causes through CIA interference. I think the whole military dictatorship was a CIA-backed coup because they always are, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's a really well-made movie. And so often we get like historical movies or biopics that feel very Oscar baity, and I
Yeah.
never felt that with this movie.
No.
This felt like someone who was making a movie they were genuinely passionate about. Well, we hope you enjoyed this episode of the Pop Cult Podcast. Make sure to check our show notes for important links, including to our blog, popcult.blog. Make sure that you're subscribed wherever it is you listen to your podcast so you'll be notified when new episodes of the show are up. If you visit popcult.blog, you're going to find a lot more reviews. And in March, we're doing a series called 13 Countries, 13 Films, where I watch a film from a country I've never seen a movie from. This week, you'll be seeing reviews for Osama, which came from Afghanistan, Who Killed Captain Alex, a film from Uganda, and You Will Die at 20, which is from Sudan. If you enjoy what we do here on the podcast and over on the blog, we'd encourage you to support us on Patreon. We've got different reward levels to choose from. I want to thank our current patron, Matt, who donates at the writer's room level. That lets him get to pick a movie every month for me to watch and review. And if you give it that level, you can add your own thoughts to that review if you want to. No matter what level you donate to, you will get access to our patron-exclusive podcasts. Coming up shortly after this episode drops will be a free preview of our new series, which is a director's spotlight on Japanese director Ryusuke Hamaguchi. We've got some more series that will be coming up later this year that I think will be focusing on television sitcoms and other sorts of media that I think are going to be very fun. On our next episode of the Pop Cult Podcast, we've got Denmark's entry into the 2025 Oscars, The Girl with the Needle, as well as the French animated science fiction thriller Mars Express. Until next time, you keep listening, we'll keep watching. Our podcast music was provided by thepodcasthost.com and Alitu, the podcast maker. Find your own free podcast music over at thepodcasthost.com/free music.